Hello, this is Kevin Benedict, SMAC Analyst with Cognizant, and that's the acronym for Social Mobile Analytics and Cloud. And I have the privilege of spending time this afternoon here in San Ramon, California, with Sahara Alexis, who's the Head of Advisory Services here at Cognizant Mobility. Sahara, thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Kevin.
I have a question for you. There's a number of acronyms floating out there. There's things like BYOD, MDM for Mobile Device Management. I've even heard of MAM, Mobile Application Management, and I've heard a debate out there between, do you really need to manage devices and secure devices, or are you just managing apps, or are you just managing data? What's your take on that discussion, Sarah?
I think in the past it was about managing devices and managing application. In the future, it's about managing information.
And why is there a change?
Well, I think more and more companies are adopting the BYOD strategy, bring your own device. But with that, you have commingling of both personal information as well as corporate information. So the idea of wiping, quote unquote, a device may not be in the best interest. So how do you figure out how to contain corporate specific information and segment it away from the personal? And how do you deal with the person who may take their iPad home and their child may go on and download some malware or something like that? Is how do you protect the organization? Well, you protect the organization by figuring out how you're going to manage your data and your information. I think when you're just managing an application, yes, it does one thing, but does it really protect the data? Because the data can be downloaded to the device, right?
Right.
Even though you have security. So those are important things that companies have to start to think of when they're thinking about mobility and the types of applications that they're writing and where that data and information resides.
Do you know, I was talking to one of the vendors, security vendors, the other day, who said they even have rules and governances within their security systems that say you can't cut and paste within a corporate app.
Yes.
They can also do geofencing around it so that the data you have access to on campus may not be the same data you can access once you leave the parking lot.
Yes, that is true.
And when you enter the building, perhaps you don't have access to all your personal kinds of apps that you may have outside in the parking lot but not in the building. So they, in this particular vendor, had all kinds of rules around what you could do and not do and access and not access just based on location as well.
Right, so they're becoming much more sophisticated. I think one of the preliminary steps that people are taking are just considering, well, what data do we really want out there?
Right.
In the event there is exposure, right? You don't want to have your certain IP accessible from any mobile device.
Right.
Right, so that should be on lockdown. So there's different tiers of security parameters that are around the data. So that if you're in the building, if you're out the building, if somebody's in another country and they lose their device, is there something that's so significant that it could be damaging on that device? Right, so there's those different areas of focus and concentration that people are starting to consider more so, without making it too complicated, because you don't want to overcomplicate it.
Right.
But you want to be true to your end users and obviously protect the company.
So what does it really look like if you're protecting data and rather than just devices? Do you have some kind of list that says here's all your apps or here's all your data streams, or what does that really look like?
Well, I think a lot of companies are starting to look at a data policy.
Okay.
I mean, imagine that. You have a data policy, right? But with the onset of mobility, a data policy has to come into play. And it actually segments data according to the parameters that you just mentioned.
Okay.
So that people can kind of navigate through all this information, right? And the other thing is that more and more security companies are starting to become more sophisticated around these fencing of information and how something can be downloaded or copied and pasted or limited in nature when something is breached, quote unquote.
So I've heard in the industry people talking about this notion of personas.
Yes.
What's that mean to you?
Personas typically are role-based
policies or what?
Well, not necessarily policies, but the way that people's behavior function within an environment. So, for example, Sahara, may also be a manager as well as a salesperson, versus Kevin may be a sales manager as well as a field operator
And a
in
soccer
combination,
dad.
and a soccer dad, right? So you may have 3 different personas together that says, as a manager, you can access X, Y, and Z, right? As a field manager, you also have visibility on data around stores or facilities and things of that sort. And then you may have a different kind of persona around being a soccer dad, right? But these 3 personas can live independently.
Okay.
They don't necessarily have to be
each
combined.
one has access to different data.
It can have access to completely different data.
And you could then have different rules and policies around each of those those personas.
Yes.
Interesting. This can get complex.
It can get complex.
I built an application with my team, which it really was. The visibility of a salesperson was just their territory, but then their local manager may have visibility to 8 different territories because those 8 people reported into them.
Mm-hmm.
But then the vice president of sales had access to everyone's territory and sales information based on the role and responsibility of the vice president. So I've seen that and deployed that. It's a challenge.
Right, well, I mean, think about it. Analytics and mobility kind of go hand in hand.
Yes.
Right, so defining how that information is going to be presented, how it's going to be stored, how it's going to be accessed is very important. And defining how you're going to move forward with that kind of data. We're not talking about just content being brought down, but if you're going to be able to manipulate, update, modify, it's important to understand how that works in your environment.
Well, Sahara, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us. You're traveling and advising companies all over, and we got you here free today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah.